Welcome to Permission for Pleasure, where we empower women to create liberated empires, anchored in leadership harmony in service of your highest mind, body, and soul wellness. I am your host, Amy Jones, and in today's episode, we're going to be connecting with my dear friend, Amanda Quick. She's a quantum energy healer and coach. So a little bit of background for you. After Amanda's spiritual awakening in 2020, she became fascinated with all things metaphysical and quantum healing. She jumped into learning everything she could to understand what more was out there and why we experience the hardships that we do. This is the experience that catapulted her awakening was in 2016 when her then husband was arrested for attempted human trafficking. She was a stay-at-home mom of 3 kids under 5. And as you can imagine, her world exploded in more than you can imagine ways possible. And now it's the time. It's time for her to tell her story, her journey of welcoming pure pleasure and joy into her world. Amanda, it's our honor to share this empowering space with you here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, your story is very, very powerful. And we're going to try and condense whatever we can in the next 30 or 40 minutes. We might have to have separate conversations. But the bow that we're going to tie around this is really share with our listeners your empowering journey of personal mind, body, and soul wellness anchored in leadership harmony. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I had literal shivers as you were talking. So
I know. And I was connecting into her energy before we started, and your story is powerful and it needs to be heard and it needs to be shared because there's so many women that can connect with your story. And so I'd love for you to share with us today what has inspired you to come forward and to speak.
So in 2020, it was actually when my divorce was final, and it had been 4 years of chaos in so many ways. And I kept hearing over and over and over in my mind that this needs to be a book. People need to hear this story, because as I was going through it, it felt like I was living in the craziest soap opera. It literally felt like every week there was some new insane thing that happened. And I just kept hearing, this needs to be a book and people need to know. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know that there's a way out. They need to know this story. And so I started writing, and it was not an easy book to write. I set it down many times for many months, but I finally have finished it. And so it's time to share it with the world.
Yeah, it's really important. And when this episode airs, I think this episode is going to be airing at some point in January. I think we've decided your book is coming out. What is the date of your book release?
The book release will be January 10th. That's the official launch date. And so January 10th is the date. It is Human Trafficking Awareness Month in the US. And so we want to bring awareness to these topics. And this is how I can do so.
This is the topic. Yeah. And so we're going to put all the links at the bottom to connect you to Amanda's world. Perfect. So Amanda, what major obstacles showed up with you along your way? Either 2016 when all this started, 2020 awakening, like there's
a lot. So obviously the first obstacle is, I was married with 3 kids. My youngest was 1, still nursing everything. And I was a stay-at-home mom. I had been for the entire time my kids were little. And one day my husband doesn't come home. Legitimately, just did not come home. And I couldn't find him until I did find him in jail. And when they told me that he was in jail for attempted human trafficking with a $250,000 bond, I thought it was like a mistake. I thought maybe somebody had stolen his wallet or something. Like what? It made 0 sense. I didn't even know what the charge meant. I had to Google it because to me, human trafficking was like shipping containers, which made 0 sense to me. And we were well off. We both, he had a decent job and we had savings, and like, it didn't make any sense to me. And so what I found out later along the way was it was a sting operation. he showed up to meet an 11 and 14-year-old for sex, and it was a sting operation, and that's what he was arrested for. And trafficking is more than just shipping containers. It's selling people for whatever service. And so I didn't have that information at the time. And so that was a huge obstacle, because it was also very public. There was newspaper articles, everybody in town knew. And so talk about I felt somehow connected to and responsible for all of this. And at the same time, I had massive trauma of my own from my dad leaving when I was 9. And so I didn't know how to take my children's dad away from them, because I also believed his version of story. And once he got out of jail and he was able to tell his story was that he wouldn't have gone through with it, and he didn't believe it was real, and he was trying to figure out how to report it. And as a stay-at-home mom, I'm completely financially dependent on this other person and totally traumatized by my own dad leaving. I stayed in the marriage, and I stayed because it felt safer to stay than to leave. And that was a huge thing for me, because it actually meant I shut myself off from the rest of the world, because being seen, staying in that was I was such at war with myself about it, because while it was safer inside this little bubble I had created, the outside world was very unsafe because of all of the judgments that I felt.
There's so many layers.
There is.
In what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I've got a notepad, so if you see me writing, I'm writing down things so I don't forget. I mean, ultimately, it's like what I keep hearing is this trauma that a lot of us face is this fear of abandonment. And
yes.
And we just even said this before we started, the biggest enemy of great is good.
Mm-hmm.
You had on paper checked all the boxes. You were the family.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Exactly.
But you didn't know you had skeletons in the closet. And then you had this steep growth learning curve. And then you're faced with, well, do I live in fantasy or do I live in reality? It's safer in fantasy, because then I don't have to feel
exactly
all of the uncomfortableness. And your stability. And in a marriage, you think you're in a partnership, your stability is a partnership, but ultimately your journey of leadership comes down to having your stability, and your stability was outsourced.
Exactly.
And so your journey then became to bring stability and foundation and safety within yourself. And that's
exactly
a very powerful journey.
It is. It absolutely is. And eventually, after he pled guilty and only received probation, which is a whole nother conversation. We don't need to have that one, but that's ultimately what happened. And
the system let you down in that one because it was not safe, but you're right.
Yes. The system never questioned us, never actually dug deeper, never did anything to confirm anything beyond that initial arrest. And at the time, I was grateful for it, because it meant things calmed down. Looking back, obviously, the system very much failed me and my kids. But nevertheless, I actually went back to work in 2017 because I hadn't been at work in 6 years. And I kept feeling like the longer the gap got, the harder it was going to be for myself. And he could not go back to work. His mental health at that point and the ability to get the kind of job that he used to have was also not reality, because he had worked in IT information security. And as a now felon, that wasn't going to happen. So I went back to work. And while I wasn't making the same kind of money he was making, all of a sudden it was coming from me. I was more stable within myself. I was more than just the mom and wife in this little fantasy land. And I started to step outside of this bubble I had created, but I rejected the bubble as soon as I did that. I refused to tell anybody anything about my life. Like, they knew I had a husband and kids, but I wouldn't even say his name, because I was so scared that somebody was going to connect the dots to the article they read in the paper a year ago. Like, I was terrified that they were going to find out this deep secret I had. And eventually I realized, well, if my two worlds cannot collide, which one is the problem? And I started to recognize that this fantasy world was the problem, and stepping outside of it actually allowed me to see it from an observer's standpoint. And I was honestly disgusted with what I saw. and the amount of manipulations and the amount of things going on to keep me in that world. And my whole body started to reject it. And I actually turned to substances for a little while. I got to a point where I had to drink a half a bottle of wine to even have a conversation with my husband, because I couldn't look at him anymore. Exactly. And I needed to numb myself to be in that place, which obviously is a problem in itself. But I recognized it and I had to, okay, this is not okay. This is not the answer. The answer is not to turn into a whiny. I need to do something.
Yeah.
And I actually also found myself attracted to a coworker. So I was really pushing all of these boundaries to find my way out. I didn't know what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. I was trying to anchor into any other thing to get me out. And I did end up actually dating this coworker, but I did it in full disclosure to my husband at the time, because I knew what it like to be cheated on, and I wasn't going to play that game. But I was kind of like, no, I'm done. I'm done being in this marriage with you. But what I didn't see yet at the time was how unsafe he truly was. I just was like, I can't be in the marriage anymore. I can't be in an intimate relationship with you anymore, but you still are like children's father. And so I played that game for a while, where I was dating somebody else and we were trying to co-parent, and we were still married and even living in the same house, just in separate parts of the house for a long time. And things just got worse. Things just got worse, and his mental health got worse. And it's like, once I stepped further and further out of this bubble, I started to see the deviances and the truth of the mental health. And I started to see truly how broken, in a sense, this man was, and how much it was impacting not just me, but my children themselves. And eventually he filed for divorce because he decided he was going to use the system to manipulate me. That was his goal. He thought it would make me come running back to him or something. Didn't work. But then we got the system involved, which added a whole nother layer of difficulty. And then he did finally move out, but then we had the children going back and forth. And anybody who's ever played that game, it's really, really hard. And my kids were young, and they were going back and forth between houses 4 times a week. And they were going back and forth between houses with very different parents, very different rules and structures. And they got worse. The chaos in them got worse. And I was so frustrated that it had come to this. After all of the support I had given him, now it had come to this thing that was really impacting the children. But I didn't know how to, I couldn't go backwards. I had to keep going forwards. And I really had to find what I wanted. And I spent a long time giving my power away to the system and the structure. I hired the lawyers, I hired the evaluators, I hired the people to figure this out. Tell me how to do this. He had a ton of restrictions as a sex offender on probation. You were not allowed to be around any other children, but he did have access to his. So he couldn't go to their schools. He couldn't go to their activities. He couldn't pick them up. He couldn't do all these things, but he wanted 50-50 custody. And I was like, this is insane. This is insane. It makes no sense. But he was trying to portray himself as a stay-at-home parent and the primary parent, in fact, on probation as a sex offender. Like it was nuts. And it was nuts. And things just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I was sitting in so much indecision. Scared to fight for what my heart needed, what my body was telling me, what safety meant for me, with the potential that was going to impact the kids having the relationship with their father because of my own trauma. And I even remember times he threw that at me. He would even say, you hated your mom for what she did and took your dad away. And so he would exasperate it. And eventually what woke me up is I started to see my own children being groomed. And that's a very, very hard thing to experience and to go through and to actually even accept as truth. And it happened in small chunks over time until there was eventually, I couldn't deny it. I couldn't look away from it. It was so loud. And I saw my own kid in danger. And I saw him in danger from his father. And I saw the fact that I had been sitting in indecision for the last 3 years, 4 years at the time, being the reason that happened. And I realized that while I didn't cause this, I didn't cause this initial thing. What I did cause was the fact that I didn't choose. I didn't choose the outcome I needed. I didn't choose to get out. I didn't choose to change. And so I was in some way responsible. And I had to take accountability for that before I could change it. And I had to actually shift myself to get myself out of the situation that I created. And I was very, very guided, divinely guided to see this psychic actually. And I didn't even think it was real. It was my therapist, my regular mental health therapist, that said, have you ever thought about seeing a psychic? I was like, is that even are they real? Do you know anybody that's like legit? And she's like, oh yeah, you got to see this lady. And when I sat down in that office and she shared with me the past life that I had lived with my ex-husband, my entire body was like in fear immediately. Like I could feel everything she was saying in a way that I didn't understand was possible. And the story she told about how he had literally beat me to death in front of my children gave me this understanding that that's where the fear that I had been holding on to. And that's why I couldn't move, and why I couldn't choose, why I couldn't do anything. And that this pattern was coming up again for me to look at, so that I finally chose. And she said to me, she's like, this is why your angel sat you down in this chair today, because you need to choose. And I was like, but I did choose. She's, no, you haven't. You need to choose right now. And I saw all of these trajectories and possibilities that I had kept open. I had hoped that one day he would even heal or get better, and so that my kids could have a father. I had all of these outcomes that everybody else had given to me, the way the system said it was supposed to work, the evaluator said it was supposed to work, the lawyers, his own trajectory, even of us even potentially getting back together, was still somewhat open because of my own trauma. And I went, oh, okay, I have to choose. And I stood up in that chair and I said, I'm done. And I didn't know how to work with energy at the time. I didn't know what any of that meant. And I let it go. I let it completely go. And I said, now what do I do? If I'm done, now what do I do? And we sat down and we talked through possibilities and outcomes. And she said to me, you have people that are willing to help you. You have to be willing to ask for help, and you have to be willing to ask anybody. You do so respectfully, but you don't stop. And I left her office, and the series of events that happened over the next 6 weeks were literally miraculous, because I was, at that point in time, it looked like I was very much going to be sharing custody with a man who was about to abuse my children. Child Protective Services did nothing to the reports that I did. They just excused them away. His own probation officer polygraphed him and said, nope, all is well. And my mama heart knew that that was not okay. Things were not okay in that house. And so I had to keep going. And I was able to actually I had a coworker who had an uncle who worked for ICE in the States, who put me in touch with Homeland Security, who put me in touch with the arresting officer. All of a sudden, things started to unfold. My realtor suggested I called the DA. The DA unsealed the case file for me, which is now public record. I was able to get all of this other information just handed to me in a new way. Every idea that anybody had, or any idea that anybody they knew had, I did. I tried. And the majority of them didn't pan out, but I didn't stop. It didn't stop because I shifted myself to go, the only thing that I'm going to do is create an outcome that brings safety and security to myself and my children. That is what I'm creating here. And no other outcome is possible, which means that he gets no more than supervised visitation, which means that he does not get access to them in this way, because I'm not okay and they're not okay. The amount of parental alienation going on at the time was intense. And so I focused on that. I focused on safety and security for myself, for my kids. I listened to my kids in a different way. I recorded the conversations in a different way. I was looking for evidence at this point to make my case that things were not safe now, so that they could do something about it. 6 weeks after that meeting with the psychic was my divorce hearing. And it took that 6 weeks. And then I had full custody of the kids. Things shifted so fast once I shifted.
So I'm just going to pause and just let that sink in.
Yeah, I know that was a lot.
As you're talking, this is what I was writing.
Yeah. Just all the things. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'll take a picture of this for everybody. And I want to kind of touch on a few points. First of all, thank you. There are so many people in your situation with a different experience, but it's
Exactly.
the same story. This is the experience that you came
Yes.
to experience. And like, I'm just looking at this, right? It's like rise,
Yeah.
rise in your self-leadership, because you
Yes.
outsourced your decision making, you outsourced you
Yes.
outsourced every single thing unknowingly.
Yep.
And this is kind of what's happening. A lot of people are realizing that they really don't have self-leadership, and they're in these situations that are very disempowering, because we were never taught by our parents, by our ancestors, how to do this. We just followed the path, and here we are. And yeah, and I love how you said you re-shifted your focus to inner safety, inner security, inner
Mhm.
stability. Like me, I have a version of this story similar to you, where you literally have to learn how to rebuild your foundation from the ground up
Yes.
in empowered, harmonized self-leadership, masculine structure, feminine intuition. The structure is do the things that your feminine intuition, your soul, the
Yes.
whispers are saying to you,
Yes.
which you discounted for so long because you were like, there's no way this can't be real. I'm safe in this world that I think is safe, because you're
Exactly.
cut off from your heart and you're cut off from your intuition. And I love that you said you started to listen to your children and you
Mhm.
started to talk to your children differently,
Yep. I
because that,
stopped blaming them. I was so upset with them because they were the amount of alienation going on meant they were actually physically fighting to even come to my house. I was so frustrated with that situation. I was like, I literally birthed and fed these children from my body, and here they are fighting with me to go play video games and have candy and all of the, you know, the crap. And I had to start seeing that this wasn't their fault. This wasn't them doing this. I needed to place blame where it was actually due, and I needed to hear them and see them where they were and what was going on with them, instead of being so frustrated and hurt by what they were doing to me, because it wasn't about that.
like, I'm getting emotional even saying this, because it's like they wanted to just push the easy button and have candy and play video games, and that's
Yes.
great. And unfortunately, the mom, as you, had to do the hard work of
Yes.
leading them, holding space, redirecting them to grow as humans into being leaders.
Yes.
Like, that's literally what I'm doing with my children right now, is I'm constantly recorrecting, course correcting, so that they can become empowered self-leaders and
Yes.
not lemmings, which is
Exactly.
a very different world.
Right. Well, and I had this belief for such a long time that if my kids were okay, I would be okay. And I kept repeating that if they're okay, and therefore we need to keep this fantasy structure, they're okay, I'm okay. But the truth is, I was completely backwards. I needed to make sure I was okay first. I needed to take care of me, find safety and security for self first, and then they would be okay.
And as you say this, it's 11:11 a.m.
Of course.
Of course.
But I mean, society teaches us to put everybody else above self, right? That's what a good mother does. I mean, it's literally a statute in my divorce that you can put your kids above yourself. You have to prove that you can do that in order to be considered a good parent.
And it's so backwards, but you don't see it until you're out of it, and you're like, oh wow, I got to fill up my bucket first before I can fill up somebody else's bucket.
I
And
needed to be
so,
safe in order for them to be safe.
yeah. And so I'm going to get to that in a second. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you're at this decision point,
Mhm.
you're in this chaos. And so I always vision a tornado or a hurricane. And you're in the eye of the hurricane and it's quiet, but you're in a fucking hurricane.
Yeah.
So do you stay in the hurricane and move with it and wait for it to eventually like peter out? Or do you use all of your might and your will and your courage to walk back into the storm to get to what is actually safety, because you're away from the hurricane? And so you have these two choice points.
Mhm.
And I love that you said what brought it to you was seeing your children. Um unbeknownst to them,
Yeah.
learning patterns, and you had a choice to break the pattern. And so
Yes.
you chose to leave the center of the tornado, to leave the hurricane.
Yes, I did.
And tell me how
And
that
do so essentially blindly, right?
Yeah.
So,
And then the universe responds, and in 6 weeks,
yes,
you're on another path.
correct.
How were you feeling? Like, because this is so important for like those women and those people that are in these points. Like, we feel you. We've been in those choice points. And they are paralyzing.
They can be. They absolutely can be.
And so when you made that decision, I know how I felt in it. I'd like for you to share like how you felt, like in inspiration.
So, because I
you're coming out of
vividly remember, and it feels like it was an instant, but obviously there was a lot that happened in that moment. It was this moment of recognizing all of the things that I said I was doing everything that I could, because I believed that when I walked into that office. I believed I was already doing everything I possibly could. I'd hired all the people. I did all the things. Like, I was like, why isn't this working? It was this huge awareness that that was not true. I was sitting and letting it stew around me, just throwing stuff out there, letting other people direct me, which was not me doing everything I could. And when I realized that shift, that I was still giving up my power, it was this moment of like, okay, you're right. And it was this instant accountability and this like almost this determination building up in me. Like, I will not stop. It was this feeling of
Mama bear for you.
yeah, this absolutely. Because I think, especially as a mother, a lot of times, because of the society, because of all the things, we won't do things to bring safety to ourselves. But when it comes to seeing our kids in danger, it sparks something else in us. And I'm so grateful for my children, and because if it wasn't for them, I don't know where I would be. I don't know that I would have stayed in the beginning in the first place, but I also wouldn't have had these awarenesses that I have now. And seeing them in danger and seeing their innocence being threatened, just like full mama bear comes up, and then realizing that I had a part to play in that and taking accountability for that. And then saying, okay, I see it. Now, what am I going to do about it? And the level of determination that rose in me in that moment was unlike, I don't know that I've ever been that driven. I made a commitment, a vow to myself that I would not stop no matter what. If I didn't succeed at that next court hearing, doesn't matter. We would keep going. Every piece of data and evidence would continue to come forward. I had to make this decision that no amount of money would ever stop me from fighting for this. No amount of obstacle, no amount of people telling me no, or it's not like that, would stop me. That's the level of determination I had to come to, because my divorce cost me over $75,000. And I had to not care. I remember telling myself, you're 30 years old, Amanda, you can make more money. Get over it. Move on. Like, I had to be there. It didn't matter, because this fight to find safety for myself and for my kids ultimately was the only thing that had to matter in that moment. That was the level of determination that I operated from that entire 6 weeks. And every time something happened that didn't succeed, because we tried a couple times before the court hearing to actually take the kids away and bring them to safety, and it didn't succeed. And I had to go, okay, there's a reason this didn't work yet, because there's more data I need. And so this is happening for me. The reason this isn't working yet is because it's not supposed to. I had to trust this creation I was putting out there. I had to go, we can do this, it's okay. Having to hand my kids over still 4 times a week over that 6 weeks was probably the hardest part of all of it, because I couldn't just pack them up and run away. I had to, instead of giving my power to the system, I had to use my power within the system to create the experience that I needed. And so I had to play by the rules, but I had to do so in a way that I was in charge. And so it was a very different.
That's a very fine line.
It is. It is. I had to be.
And how you get to that fine line, may I propose, is you get quiet and you listen and you trust your inner leadership. And as I'm saying this, my whole body just started vibrating.
Yes.
Because you've removed the noise and the chaos, and you can actually breathe and create space to listen and rise in your leadership. Like that spark has ignited.
Yeah.
And you ultimately, no discount to your parents, but you ultimately became the parent that you needed.
Yes. Yes.
To pay forward that leadership.
Exactly. I remember after the hearing, before we knew the outcome, my lawyer says to me, because I was so grateful and I could feel the weight of the importance of that day and what had happened, and so grateful. And he looked at me, he said, I just did my job. You created this. They were shocked at how much I brought to the table and how much I kept giving them. The binder of evidence was like 3 inches full, stacked of evidence. And they were like, no, nobody creates outcomes like this. In the state of Colorado, where this all went down, 50-50 is the default, even in these type of situations, because the constitutional right to parent trumps most other things. And so nobody gets these kind of outcomes, but I did. And I believe that anybody truly can, if they step into that level of self-leadership, if they step into that place where they operate from trust and they really, truly desire to create that safety and security for themselves and their children. And that's what I want people to get from my story. I want people to see, no matter how bad it gets, we can come out of it. We can come out of it and we can create an entirely new reality, because my life today looks nothing like it did in 2016 or 2020. Nothing at all. And it's just getting better.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I'll go into that and to transition, to layer into this. I think the other little nugget is you end up instantly releasing all this energetic, heavy baggage, and you feel cleaner and lighter, and like you can just breathe and you don't feel suffocated. And if that's not fuel in amongst itself, to just have that pureness.
That it's clarity. The decisions were easy.
Clarity. Yeah.
The decisions were easy. If it was supportive to my goal, I did it. It wasn't a question. It wasn't, but I'm scared. It wasn't any of that. It was, this is what I'm doing. And can you help me? And how can you help me? And let's do that. Like it was a very clear path. And I stopped hiding. I started asking for help. I stopped saying, I don't want anybody to know. I said, this is what's happening. How can you help me? Who do you know? I had this awareness. Everybody knows somebody, and somebody knows somebody. And so I got to tap into this bigger network of people because I allowed myself to be seen in what was going on. And most people wanted to help in some regard. They knew somebody that they wanted to introduce me to, or they made a phone call on my behalf, or they did something that tapped me into another set of people. And I decided that I couldn't live with myself if I had any doubt that I did everything possible. And so that meant that every idea that anybody had, I did. Every idea that anybody they knew had, I did. I just kept going. I just like, I'm going to throw all of everything I have at this, because I need to know for me that I've done everything I possibly can. And I'm not stopping. And that's the energy I ran with, and that's what I held. And that's ultimately why I succeeded.
I love how at the very top of my page, I wrote what your therapist said, don't stop asking for help.
Yep.
Don't stop asking for help, because it may not be that, but it's the connection. It's the connection, and the universe works in the most magical ways.
It really does. It really does. And I got to see that. I got to see that happen in an impossible situation. I got to create a miracle out of something seemingly impossible.
Yeah, it's trusting that, you're not by yourself, that that you're not alone, that you follow your heart, you follow your truth, you follow your purpose,
Mhm.
which is really to bring enjoyment to your life.
Yes.
And it's like the path will open up as soon as you make that decision. I want to enjoy my life
Mhm.
instantly. So tell me, because I know you're enjoying your life now.
I am enjoying my
What
life
does
now.
your life look like, and what's your path look like? Where are you, where are you growing into? Tell me what's
Yeah.
going on in your world.
So different. So I got full custody of my kids 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. Like, legitimately could have not been more divinely timed because there was no quarantines or anything like that. I just, and we have also now not heard from him in any capacity since April of 2020. So just, he took himself off the map. Once he lost control of me and no longer had any type of decision making, he chose not to participate. And that is the hardest blessing I have ever had to take, that it has been better for myself and my kids in this situation.
Yeah, it's very
Because
difficult.
ultimately my kids lost a parent, which is its own challenge, but we are safe. And so it was very clear to me after I ended up leaving my corporate job, because full-time stay-at-home parent in the middle of a pandemic, all of a sudden things were harder. And so I left my corporate job that summer in 2020, and I kind of sat for a long time. And I went, there's no reason for me to stay in Colorado. My job was gone. My ex was gone. His family wasn't around and participating with us either. My family wasn't there. But I didn't know where I wanted to go. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And the pandemic offered a level of safety in a sense. Nobody was really doing anything. So I jumped into learning things. I jumped into this belief that I had all of a sudden opened this doorway to more in the universe and more that could help me and more I could access. I'm not somebody who was like, okay, I'm going to go hire a psychic every time I need to know something. Nope, I need to figure this out. If they can do it, so can I. And that's the belief I held. And I just chased is anything that felt good and expansive to learn. And so I jumped into learning about energy healing. I jumped into understanding how our bodies respond to trauma. I jumped into everything I could find and more, because I recognized that part of why I had experienced what I experienced was so that I could help other people go through their own stuff and process their own things and make their own changes. And so how could I do so and help them even more with new awarenesses on this side? And so I did that. And I started to meet people all over the world. I started to connect to people all over the world. I started to open up a different type of connection that I had ever experienced. I had never truly experienced being seen before myself. Not, maybe my mother is the closest, who has somebody who can actually see me on an energetic level, but I didn't even understand what that meant truly until, I always was the fixer and the one talking, and I never really knew what it felt like to be in an actual connection with somebody who can both see and hold you in an energetic way. I didn't know what that meant. And the next thing that I really started chasing was connection and community. So now that I had safety and security, my next desires was, I don't want to do this all by myself. I can, and I have done it by myself, but it's not what I wanted. And so I started calling in my home. I started figuring out where that was going to be. And I started really putting out this energy of connection and community and support for myself and my kids. And more synchronistic magic has happened. And now I'm sitting here in a brand new place, remarried to a man who has taken on 3 kids who are not biologically his. And I also have another friend who's now moved into my basement, which means I have 3 adults in my house helping support 3 children. I have stepped into actually doing energy healing as a business. And I have more and more data that just wants to stream through me about how we can actually shift not just our lives, but collectively how we can start to move forward in evolution. And it's all very, very exciting. And it feels like I'm just barely getting started. But I think the thing that happened is I recognized if I could create an outcome like that, I can do anything. That was the thing that hit me. I can do anything. And so what do I want? And I got to play with that and I got to explore that. And I'm still playing with that, truthfully, because the more we receive and the more we understand, the more we realize we're not dreaming big enough. We're really not. And so that's the place I'm in today. It's so much fun to live my life. You know, it's so much fun to wake up and have somebody beside me who adores me and my kids and who would literally move mountains for us and who sees me. He's on his own healing journey and on his own spiritual path and wants to evolve with us. And like, I didn't know I could be in a relationship like this. I didn't even know they existed. It didn't even make sense. And yet here we are. And I wake up in the morning and I have new ideas for my business and new things that I can put out into the world. And it just feels fun and exciting. And it's not about making money. It's about how can I have the most fun I can possibly have today? How can I be completely satiated in all areas of my life? Like that's the energy that I'm in today, which is so different.
I just want people that are watching this to reflect on the energy and the seriousness. Obviously, it was a serious topic, but your energy and your tone and your lightness shifted from dark to light. Like you and I are both smiling.
Right.
And as you were talking, I was writing the words down, but I was also hearing them: play, joy, fun, pleasure. Great. You are allowing yourself to be the kid that you were never allowed to be. And like the whole purpose is to have fun and enjoy life.
But to me, it's not, why are we doing it if it's not fun?
Well, exactly. Like, let's have some fun and enjoy and like what, and when you're in a world, somebody else's box, how could you possibly have fun in somebody else's box? It's not your box.
Right.
Get out of the box. You don't even need to be in the box. Right. There is no box. And yeah, this is awesome. I love it. So, I think this is probably good. I was going to ask you a couple more, but I think this is really good. I want to leave it here, and I would love for you to share a phrase or a word of inspiration for the people that are watching in inspiration to pay forward. What would you like to leave our viewers with today?
What I would like everybody in the world to know, if I could sprinkle pixie dust all over the planet, which I feel like I'm trying to do here, but if I could literally sprinkle pixie dust all over the planet, what I would love to gift everybody is deep trust in self. Deep, deep trust in self that you can create anything. You can anchor in any reality you desire. If you operate from that self-trust, that self-leadership, if you truly operate from that place within yourself, that's how we change the world. I 100% believe that is how we change the world. And it starts first by changing your world. Yes. And everything is a reflection. And so you change your world and everything around you changes because you interact with people differently. Exactly. And you inspire them differently and you share with them differently. And you get to share the stories of coming out of the deep, dark places into this new space. And you get to be the invitation for everybody that you come across to do the same. Yeah, because if I can do it, you can do it. Exactly. Exactly. This was really lovely. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to put into the notes where people can connect in with you. I'd love for you to share, take a moment and share how people can connect into you and what you can offer with them. Yes. So my book, which is a memoir of this entire story, starting in 2016 through 2020, is coming out January 10th, 2023, depending on when this airs. It will either already happened or not quite yet, but January 10th, 2023, The Sex Trafficker's Wife, the title of my book, is coming out into the world. And if you are interested in updates on that book, you can sign up on my website at amandaquickhealing.com/book. And if you want to work with me personally, I do offer one-on-one and group coaching, and you can find all of the information about all of my programs and how to connect with me at amandaquickhealing.com as well. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story.
I see you, I hear you, I love you, and I know a lot of other women are going to connect with your story. So thank you for paying it forward. It's been my honor and privilege to share this space with you today.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.